The general consensus seems to be that Sony's color science sucks. Skin tones look awkward and you waste a ton of time just trying to establish a baseline that doesn't look like a hot mess. But it doesn't have to be that way. When I started developing my emulation of Canon's color science, I had 3 main goals. Number 1, camera settings need to stay as they are. I don't want to bake anything in. Number 2, it has to work with all common workflows and every video editing software out there. And number 3, it just needs to work. Before I tell you more about it, let's see it in action. I filmed all these sample shots on a Sony a7 Mark III, so we're talking about 8-bit footage here. And of course, there is no color grading applied. All you see is the emulation at work. To find out whether this tool is right for you, there are a few things you should consider. I didn't recreate a mathematically correct approximation of Canon's color science. I didn't want to do this, and this wasn't my goal. So if you want to use it to shot match between Sony and Canon cameras, I recommend you stay away from it and learn proper shot matching techniques. Instead, I wanted to capture the essence of what makes Canon colors so pleasing and recreate the characteristics of Canon's color science. Additionally, I tried to recreate the vibe of the OG days on YouTube. I'm talking about the aesthetics of the era of Casey Neistat and the early days of Peter McKinnon, to name only 2. Both were Canon shooters at the time, and Casey didn't even color grade in post. My goal was to achieve a sense of immediacy, as if it comes straight out of the camera. I designed the emulation in a way that is neutral enough to work well in most circumstances without any adjustment required. But at the same time, the look is supposed to be bold and unapologetic. Before we take a look at how it actually works, let's briefly have a look at what you get. The name of my emulation is EOS Alpha. If you open the folder and have a look inside, you can see it comes as a suite of LUTs. I know, everybody has an opinion on LUTs, but let me tell you one thing. LUTs are an incredibly powerful tool, but at the same time, they are vastly misunderstood. We will talk about everything you need to know, and I promise, as long as you don't make any of the crucial mistakes we will discuss, EOS Alpha will work for you every time. Okay, back to the folder. You can see I created a full guide on how to use them. In here you find everything you need to know, from filming to post-production. However, we will touch on everything you need to know in this video as well. Currently there are options for S-Log 2 and S-Log 3. Both feature a version for S-Gamut and S-Gamut 3.Cine. A version for HLG is on its way. As with all things on my website, once I release it, you get it as a free update. Additionally, EOS Alpha comes in 2 flavors, Dynamic and Harmonic. The Dynamic version tries to emulate the punchiness right out of the box, whereas Harmonic is less contrasty, so you can either embrace a flatter look or create a custom contrast yourself. Just a little side note on that. The 5D Classic from 2008 is, in my opinion, the pinnacle of Canon's color science. I'm currently working on a 3rd option, so alongside Harmonic and Dynamic, there will also be Classic, which will emulate the colors of this wonderful camera. Of course, once I release it, you will get it as a free update as well. In the parent folder, you will also find a version for cameras and monitors. Since monitors and more recent Sony cameras can load LUTs for preview, I also included versions of the LUTs which are compatible with cameras and monitors. Currently, I'm using one of them on my Atomos Ninja 5 without any issues. To make EOS Alpha work for you, the first thing you need to get right is exposing your footage correctly. To keep things simple, I designed it based on Sony's exposure recommendations in their white papers. This means you don't have to worry about overexposing by however many stops or any of that funky stuff. To expose your footage correctly, there are 3 methods you can use, and all of the information you need is provided in the guide that comes with the LUTs. The first one, and probably the least common one nowadays, is based on an 18% grey card, which is also called middle grey. If you judge exposure by that, make sure you set your ZBrush to 32 for S-Log2 or 41 for S-Log3. Again, I don't think most of you will expose utilizing this method, but if you want, you can. Next, you could expose for your subject. To do that, the best practice is using the standard range setting for your ZBrush and dial in the correct value. If we reference the guide, skin tones should be between 48 and 52 for S-Log3. So I set my ZBrush to standard range 50 plus minus 2, which means ZBrush will show up from 48 to 52. When exposing my scene, I make sure I can see the ZBrush on the skin tones. And that's pretty much it, you nailed exposure. Last but not least, you could also expose for your highlights. S-Log2 clips at 109 and S-Log3 clips at 93. I tend to expose my footage as bright as possible. This is why I usually go with this method. To do that, I set my ZBrush to 90 and increase the exposure so the ZBrush will show up. Then I back it off until they disappear. If you don't see any ZBrush, this means all highlight information is preserved. However, I should mention that this method of exposing is more suitable for artistic pieces because preserving the highlights almost always comes at the cost of underexposing your subject and eventually losing detail in the shadows. Even though S-Log offers a lot of dynamic range, it still can't overcome high contrast environments. So keep that in mind. I want to emphasize that no exposure method is the end-all be-all. You should be capable of performing all of them and choose the appropriate method for each situation. When it comes to color grading in post-production, there are a few things you just have to get right. Otherwise, my emulation will not work for you, look weird, or you leave a lot of dynamic range on the table. As mentioned before, I gravitate towards preserving my highlights during filming because I'm usually okay with losing information in the shadows. However, if we think about it, this now means every shot I film is exposed as bright as possible. This is because the highlights of each clip will sit just shy of 90 IRE. This means a lamp might end up being as bright as the sun, and depending on the context in your video, this might not make a lot of sense. Therefore, we need to decide how bright things should be in post. Adjusting your exposure in post is very easy as long as you pay attention to one key thing. If you do this wrong, and I'm not exaggerating, you will shoot yourself in the foot. Here in Final Cut Pro, the video signal in the inspector flows from top to bottom. This means adjustments at the top get processed first and adjustments at the bottom get processed last. Let's get rid of my drawings and keep that in mind. First, I apply the EOS Alpha LUT. As you can see, I chose the S-Log3 S-Gamma3.Cine dynamic version. However, my exposure is a bit hot, as you can see here on my face. So I pull up an instance of color wheels and try to lower the exposure. But as you can see, everything just reacts strangely. We introduce weird color shifts and it just doesn't seem right. All in all, we can say we don't get the proper color response we are looking for with EOS Alpha. In order to get the correct color response, I reset this, go back to the inspector and move my color wheels adjustment before the LUT. If I now go in here and adjust my exposure, you can see how everything reacts accordingly. And I think I will park it around here. If I wanted, I could also bring up the shadows just a bit and lower my offset just a tad like this, so we retain a little bit more of the shadow information. I really want to drive that point home. Always make your adjustments in the signal chain before the LUT. Otherwise, you leave a lot of information at the table that cannot be gained back. This concept is called signal chain hierarchy and it applies no matter which video editing software you use. If you want to learn more about it, I have a whole playlist on my channel. If you use DaVinci Resolve, make sure the LUT is at the very end of your node tree. And if you use Premiere Pro, why? But in all seriousness, do not apply the LUT using the Lumetri color panel and do your adjustments on there, because this is the wrong order. The LUT will be applied before your adjustments. To make sure you perform your adjustments underneath the LUT, put EOS Alpha on an adjustment layer above your clips and adjust your clips with Lumetri underneath. To show you how simple it is to get great colors, let's quickly correct this timeline. But first, let's go back to my other example and quickly compare this to Sony's manufacturer LUT. To do that, I go up here to Clip, Audition, Duplicate as Audition. Now I have a new version. So I go in here and choose the manufacturer LUT, Sony S-Log3 S-Gamma3.Cine to Rec. 709. And as you can see, everything just turned green. In my opinion, Sony's LUTs are a hot mess at best. Let's bring up the version using EOS Alpha. I press Y and switch to another version. EOS Alpha or the Sony LUT. Again, EOS Alpha, Dynamic or the Sony LUT. I get rid of this. I disable my scopes so you can see what's going on a little better. Again, I press Y to bring up my versions, and here we go. EOS Alpha, Sony. EOS Alpha, Sony. Yeah, I think you get the point. Okay, now let's go back to the other timeline. All clips in here were shot using S-Log3 S-Gamma3.Cine. So I go into my browser, grab an adjustment layer, and put it on top of everything, like so. On the adjustment layer, we can put the custom LUT effect. Like so. Inside the custom LUT effect, I go into EOS Alpha, S-Log3, S-Gamma3.Cine, and I think I will choose the dynamic version. Let's bring up our scopes as well, but I think you can tell this shot needs a little bit of work. So I select the clip underneath the adjustment layer and pull up an instance of color wheels. Now I go in here, and the only thing I want to do is lowering the offset by using the global wheel. Like so. And I think I will park my sky at around 80 IRE tops. Yeah, something like this. Again, the only thing I did is a simple exposure adjustment. This is without it, this is with it. You can see how EOS Alpha reacts accordingly. Okay, so that's about it with this shot. I think we can move on to the next one. Again, I apply an instance of color wheels and lower the overall exposure by pulling down the offset using the global wheel. It's getting later in the day, so I think my sky should top out at about 75 IRE. Again, that's it. Now I go to the next clip, select it, pull up an instance of color wheels, and you guessed it, I lower the overall exposure. Like so. Because remember, it's late in the day. However, I think we can push this a little bit further, so I drag my highlights up, just a touch, and pull my midtones down. Something like this. Overall, this shot is very magenta, so I use my white balance to run away from that just a little bit, and maybe we can also balance this out just a tad. Something like this. Okay, for the sake of this video, I leave it at that because this video is already as long as it is. I select the next clip, pull up an instance of color wheels, and we can, you guessed it, lower the overall exposure, like so, I think, and maybe this time I want to bring up the shadows just a touch. Something like this, and I compensate with lowering the exposure again. And this doesn't look too bad, so maybe I push down the midtones to bring back a little bit of that contrast. And if we have a look at the before and after, so this is before and this is after, I think we're already there. Lastly, the next clip was filmed using the same camera settings, so I just select this clip and drag this color wheels adjustment on this clip. And here we go. As you can see, I only needed to adjust my exposure of the clips to get wonderful color response from EOS Alpha. This worked because I respected the concept of signal chain hierarchy and made my adjustments before the LUT. Okay, we learned that EOS Alpha is designed to capture the essence of Canon's color science. It comes as a suite of LUTs for S-Log2 and S-Log3 featuring a harmonic and a dynamic version. Support for HLG as well as the classic emulation based on the 5D Classic will come later this year as a free update. This video was published in August of 2024, so by the time you're watching this, HLG support and the classic emulation might already be in there. Please check this on my website. When exposing your footage, keep in mind that I built EOS Alpha based on Sony's recommendations. This means it is very easy to get proper exposure. You don't need to bother with overexposing or anything. Just utilize one of the three strategies we discussed. Exposing using an 18% gray card, exposing for your subject, or exposing for your highlights. Always make sure your zebras are set accordingly. In post-production and color grading, make sure you respect the concept of signal chain hierarchy. As discussed, perform your adjustments before the EOS Alpha LUT. If you don't do this correctly, you will end up with weird color shifts and you lose all your precious dynamic range. By the way, this is true for all LUTs, not only EOS Alpha. If this resonates with you, I have a link to EOS Alpha in the video description. If you want to get the most out of the LUTs you already have, you should watch this video next, where we have a look at everything you need to know about LUTs.